just like to acknowledge the Libraries Tasmania's acknowledgement of Tasmanian Aboriginal peoples. We acknowledge the Tasmanian Aboriginal people as the traditional custodians of this land, and we pay our respects to elders past, present and future who hold the memories, traditions, culture and hope of Tasmania's First Peoples. Libraries Tasmania also pays respect to the resilience and strengths of the Tasmanian Aboriginal people and extends that respect to all First Australian peoples. And now I'd like to introduce Di. Everyone can read her topics, I don't really need to say it. Thank you, Di.
You're right for me to go?
Yes, I think everyone...
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much for coming today. My name's Dianne Snowden and I am an historian and genealogist. My topic today is remembering convict women and orphan school children. If you can't hear me down the back, can you just flap your arm around whenever you can't hear me? Great, thanks. Almost 13,000 convict women, together with more than 2,000 of their free children, arrived in Van Diemen's Land from 1803 to 1853. On arrival, the women were sent to the Cascades female factory or a similar institution, and their children were sent to the bleak and miserable orphan schools at Newtown. In all, nearly 6,000 children, mostly the children of convicts, were admitted to the orphan schools from 1828 to 1879. For many women sentenced to transportation to Van Diemen's Land, their anguish at being forced to leave the country of their birth and undergo a sea voyage of over 12,000 miles to a strange land can only be imagined. One of these women was Margaret Butler, aged 40, an Irish widow with 6 children who stole potatoes to feed her family. She was my great-great-great-grandmother. Margaret wrote a moving petition pleading to be allowed to remain with her children in Ireland. She wrote, or someone wrote for her, that your petitioner was tried in the last quarter sessions of Tullow for stealing a few potatoes and sentenced to 7 years transportation. Petitioner begs most humbly to state that she was left a widow with 6 fatherless children who have been dependent on the bounty of a humane and charitable public for support. Hardship alone induced her, and the tears of her wretched orphans compelled her to do what she was sentenced to leave her country for. Petitioner now throws herself on the mercy and clemency of Your Excellency, that you would be graciously pleased to commute her sentence to any length of imprisonment. But oh, in pity for her orphans, do not send her from them, as they would be thereon friendless outcasts on the world. Poverty alone drove her to do what she has done. The petition was signed from Margaret Butler, a convict in Carlo Jail. The response to Margaret's petition, as it was for so many others, was, the law must take its course. Margaret, however, was allowed to bring 2 of her 6 children with her to Van Diemen's Land. The 2 children that came with her were William, my great-great-grandfather, who was 10 years old, and his little sister, Marianne, aged 2. They were taken from Margaret and placed in the Queen's Orphan School at Newtown. Margaret and her children were never reunited. In 1855, after only 10 years in the colony, Margaret was beaten to death by her colonial husband in Lansdowne Crescent. Like Margaret, many other women were forced to leave children behind or have them taken from them when they arrived in Van Diemen's Land. Children have always been part of the convict story, although not always a visible one. Many children experienced institutional life even before arriving in Van Diemen's Land, incarcerated in county jails or workhouses. The Butler children spent their early lives with their mother in jails and institutions before leaving Ireland. The GRANGEGORMAN female convict depot was established in 1836, and it was where all Irish convict women and children were housed while they waited for a convict ship. And so, to the convict women. There were 3 phases of transportation to Van Diemen's Land. The first, exile or open prison, 1803 to 1813, assignment, 1814 to 1842, and probation, 1843 to 53. In each, the numbers of convict women arriving in Van Diemen's Land increased, and they were subjected to more severe penal conditions. From 1803 to 1813, about 90 convict women arrived. As the colonial population grew, so did the demand for female convict labour. Convict women were employed in domestic service, washing, and on government farms, and were expected to find their own food and lodging. Punishment for those who transgressed was humiliating and public. Economic and social opportunities allowed significantly improved circumstances for some convict women while others struggled. This is a picture of 2 convict women, one from the second period and one from the third period. During the second period from 1814 to 1842, just over 5,400 female convicts arrived. In 1840, the number increased significantly when transportation to New South Wales ceased and all female convicts were shipped to Van Diemen's Land. Convict women were assigned as domestic labour and were encouraged to reform through a system of rewards and indulgences, such as the ticket of leave, which permitted the holder to work for any employer for wages and to choose her own residence. In the third period from 1843 to 1853, just over 7,000 convict women arrived in Van Diemen's Land. A significant proportion, 42%, were Irish. At this time, the probation system was introduced for male and female convicts. For female convicts, there was an increased focus on classification, surveillance and isolation, and punishment and reform rather than humiliation. Newly arrived convicts were separated as much as possible from earlier arrivals. Convict women were sent to the ANSON, a converted naval ship moored in the River Derwent, which served as a probation station. The women were to serve a 6-month probation period, during which time they were trained to be obedient and to be useful servants. This was sometimes referred to as being trained in industrial domesticity. There were 5 stages of punishment and rehabilitation, and work-related discipline was a crucial part for each. The ANSON was dismantled not long before transportation ceased in 1853. Female convicts were a motley bunch. They ranged in age from children to women in old age. The youngest currently recorded in the Female Convict Research Centre database was 10, and the oldest was 75 at the time of transportation. Most of the women, however, were in their 20s or 30s, of childbearing age and able to contribute to the economy. The average age was 26.7 years. Many of the convicts were single, but some were married and others widowed. As mentioned, some brought children with them. However, most left family behind in their homeland. For many, this included children. Some convicts were transported with family members, or family members had come before them or came after them. Many of the crimes for which they were transported are considered minor offences by today's standards. The most common crime by far was stealing food, clothing, money, household items, mostly items worth no more than £5. And relatively few of the women were transported for a first offence. A few of the women even courted transportation, deliberately committing crimes such as arson in order to be transported. This is one of my favourite convicts. Her name is Alice Julian and she was from Kilkenny. She committed arson in order to be transported, and she's pictured in this photo surrounded by her grandchildren shortly before her death in 1920. So, how do we know about the experiences of female convicts? Meticulous records were kept in huge volumes which contain an amazing amount of detail. I know you can't read that, but I just wanted to show it to you to show the difference between two convict women who arrived on the same ship. So the first one, that's looking very empty, is that of Margaret Butler, and the second one, which is quite crowded, was Mary Salmon or Lyons. So compare the records of the two. Margaret's record has very little information, just the basic details, whereas Mary was a frequent offender, and so there's more detail on hers. So if you're looking for a convict, try and choose one that has a lot of information on her record. The experiences for female convicts in Van Diemen's Land varied over time and place. The life of convict women was more complex than we realise. It's not possible to say that there was a typical convict woman. Their lives were multi-layered. From the 1820s, many convict women spent time in one of the 5 female factories in Van Diemen's Land. Known colloquially as female factories, they operated throughout the period of transportation, housing female convicts who were awaiting assignment, awaiting childbirth or while weaning children and undergoing punishment. The first female factory was established in Hobart Town in the 1820s, and that was the Hobart Town Female Factory. It was followed by Georgetown, Cascades, Launceston and Ross. This is the Hobart Town Female Factory, the very first one. Does anyone know where it is? Where it was? Where was it?
Oh, Murray Street, opposite the Treasury buildings.
Yeah, so it was it was incorporated into the Hobart Town Jail.
Yeah.
So the men and the women weren't really separated, and it was really easy to get out. There were frequent escapes, and there was one woman who jumped off the wall and broke her leg, and she was sent straight back in.
She was my ancestor.
Was she? What was her name?
And Livingston.
Okay. The Cascades Female Factory. As I said, the female factories were part of a system of female convict institutions which included the convict nursery at Dunoon and hiring depots at the brickfields in Hobart and Launceston. Does anyone know where the brickfields was?
Where the North Hobart Oval
Yeah.
is at the moment.
Yep. Women were always scarce in Van Diemen's Land. The scarcity of women opened up opportunities for convict women as servants and wives. Many, like Alice Julian, successfully merged into colonial society, creating new families and through good conduct and hard work forged new lives. Above all, convict women demonstrated a diversity of character, aspirations and behaviour, contradicting their stereotype as damned whores. There are many female convict stories, and I'm going to share just 3. Eliza Davis was a foundling and grew up in the Dublin Foundling Institution. She arrived on the Tasmania 2, transported for life for infanticide. She married twice to Joseph Roebuck, who was admitted to the asylum at New Norfolk. The tragic story behind his admission was publicly reported in the Mercury. Eliza struggled to support their family while Joseph was unwell, and his awareness of this was clear in his reported words. "I am doing my best to die." He died in the asylum in 1873, aged 72. While Joseph was in the asylum, Eliza formed a relationship with Amos Eastwood and had more children with him. They married the week before she died in 1898, and this is her wedding photo. She was a much-loved midwife on the northwest coast and grandmother of 30. She died in 1898, aged 69. So it's ironic, considering the offence for which she was transported, that she ended up to be a much-loved midwife. Fanny Langstaff was transported at the age of 29 for stealing 7 cotton handkerchiefs from the matron of the jail in Dublin. She was black-haired, hazel-eyed and a straw and bonnet maker from County Longford. She was tried in Dublin and had been a prostitute for 7 or 8 years. An Irish newspaper, the Freeman's Journal, reported Fanny's trial. A young woman named Fanny Langstaff, who appeared to be about 24 years of age, of very interesting personal appearance, was indicted for stealing some handkerchiefs from GRANGEGORMAN Lane prison. It appeared that on Thursday morning the prisoner was discharged from the penitentiary, but previous to her departure she managed to steal the property in question. She was arrested with the handkerchiefs in her possession. The jury found her guilty. The recorder said, on looking over the records of the court, he found that the prisoner had been 221 times in jail, 120 times for being drunk and 101 times for various other crimes. He found out that of her comparatively short life, she had spent 6 years, 5 months and 4 days in prison, and said there was no use having her longer in this country, and therefore the sentence of the court was that she be transported beyond the seas for 7 years. The prisoner bowed to the court and said, "My lord, I don't care. I have a good education. I will turn it to some account in the country to where I am going. And I am not afraid, but I will regain my reputation and the position from which I have been reduced. Goodbye, gentlemen of the police. Fanny Langstaff will yet be a lady, what she always was. Good mother for Sydney O." She was then removed. Spirited words indeed, but were they really Fanny Langstaff's words or those of an enthusiastic, creative court reporter? While the answer to this question may never be known, the question highlights one of the main problems with historical research. Whose voice are we hearing? Nothing in Fanny's colonial records provides an answer to the question. She arrived on the Phoebe in 1845 and had several colonial convictions for disobedience of orders, being out after hours, using indecent language and drunkenness. She was in and out of the Cascades female factory and also the female factories in Ross and Launceston. She married, and after she received a certificate of freedom, like so many convicts, disappeared from the public record. And then there was Sarah Maguire, or Clifford, one of my favourite convicts. Sarah was tried in Dublin City in March 1851 and was sentenced to transportation for 7 years for larceny, stealing 10 shillings. She had a previous conviction for the same offence. In Van Diemen's Land, she was in and out of the female factory, and in the 1860s, she left with her husband for Melbourne and then New South Wales, where she continued her life of crime. Sarah's specialty was picking pockets, and she was imprisoned several times for this offence. So notorious was her reputation that the police and newspapers warned country visitors to Sydney about her. In 1894, one Sydney newspaper explored Sarah's extraordinary career of crime. It described her meek, decent demeanour, adding that, quietly dressed and neatly fixed up, she might pass anywhere as a respectable old lady of the middle class. But to those who know her character and accomplishments, she has the important claim to be regarded as one of the most dexterous and experienced pickpockets in these colonies. Her method is clean, rapid and skillful. She's invariably attired in fabrics of funereal shade and has one distinction as the woman in black. In 1910, Sarah appeared in Sydney's Central Police Court, charged with stealing 2 candlesticks from Mark Foy's retail shop. When searched, she was found to have large pockets in her underskirt, in which she had concealed a blouse and 6 collarettes. At the time, Sarah was said to be one of the oldest women criminals in New South Wales. One newspaper report described her as 76. She spoke in a high treble, was wrinkled, grey hair and without teeth. She had accumulated more than 40 years in 30 prison sentences and was declared an habitual criminal. When arrested, Sarah stated, "I can't help it. I can't keep my hands off things." She died in an asylum in Sydney in 1916, and the jail portraits that are up on the screen paint a poignant picture of a convict woman ageing. So you can see the progression and how she ended up on the far side. It's really quite rare to have a series of portraits, jail portraits like this. So for more information about female convicts, visit the Female Convict Research Centre website. Are you familiar with that? Yeah. And that of the Convict Women's Press. And now to the orphan school children. So do you know where the orphan schools are? Is there anyone who doesn't know? Okay. I'll quit now. I'll stop. The orphan schools at Newtown sit at the end of tree-lined St John's Avenue. Few people are aware of the history or significance of these buildings, although they may know of St John's Park Hospital, which closed in 1994. The term orphan was loosely applied and did not mean a child who had lost both parents, as we would use the term today. The orphan schools were one institution in 2 parts, the female orphan school and the male orphan school. The orphan schools housed destitute and orphaned children, many of whom were the children of convicts. Aboriginal children removed from their families and country were also sent there, and there were about 46 Aboriginal children admitted. Brothers and sisters were separated once they were admitted to the orphan schools. Lieutenant Governor Arthur believed that it was a great blessing to remove convict children from the contamination of the vices of their parents, and added, "The admission of the children of convicts has enabled the government to assign their parents to the service of the settlers, so that in point of fact, whilst a great blessing has been bestowed upon the children, the actual additional expense to the government is not considerable." Those children who survived the notorious convict nurseries could be admitted once they were weaned. Some as young as 18 months were admitted. Children in the orphan schools remained there until they were apprenticed out to a master or mistress somewhere between 13 and 18 years old. There was no supervision of the apprenticeships, and many of the children endured dreadful conditions. One of the saddest stories is that of Alice Fitzsimmons. Alice died on board the notorious voyage of the East London, leaving the children she brought with her alone in a strange land. On arrival in Van Diemen's Land, Alice's children were admitted to the orphan school, and later some of Alice's grandchildren were also admitted to the orphan school, creating 2 generations of orphan school children. Food in the institution was meagre and education rudimentary. Contact with family was not encouraged. In April 1839, the Colonial Times, reporting on a male orphan school, wrote, "The majority of the apartments allotted to the use of children were cold, comfortless and ill-arranged, and upon a most mistaken system of parsimonious economy. The washing places or lavatories are highly objectionable. They consist of cell-like rooms, paved with flags with a stone trough in the centre, open at both ends and consequently extremely cold and comfortless. Indeed, the prevalence of stone pavement throughout the lower apartments of the building is, in our humble opinion, highly detrimental to the health of the inmates. In one room, we saw 5 little fellows, blue and shivering with cold. There was, it was true, a fireplace in the room, but no fire. In short, there seems to be no attempt at comfort for the boys whose general appearance speaks of dankness and squalor. The image of the 5 little fellows, blue and shivering with cold, is an enduring and haunting one. A fireplace, but no fire, providing an apt symbol of the treatment of the children." From a number of inquiries, inspections and reports, information can be gleaned about the daily life and conditions experienced by the children within the institution. Concern for the children was lost in constant internal bickering, frequent inquiries, complaints, resignations and dismissals. Through the life of the institution, there were complaints about mismanagement, ill treatment and brutality. Over 400 children died, mostly from preventable illnesses. This image is of a memorial plaque with the names of all of the children that died in care, and it was erected by the Friends of the Orphan School. The children in the orphan schools committed no crime, but were nevertheless exposed to a convict-related institution which was prison-like in design and administration. The fragmentary stories of the children reveal much about the hardships of institutional life, as well as individual resilience and resourcefulness. For more information about the orphan schools, visit the Friends of the Orphan Schools website, and it has a database of all of the children who were admitted to the orphan schools. Or you can find a copy of Voices from the Orphan Schools, which I was going to bring to show you, but forgot. And now to From the Shadows. From the Shadows follows on from the hugely successful Footsteps Towards Freedom statues installed on the Hobart waterfront and unveiled by the President of Ireland, Michael D. Higgins, and the Governor of Tasmania, Professor the Honourable Kate Warner, in October 2017. Internationally renowned Irish sculptor Rowan Gillespie is noted for his FAMINE sculptures on Custom House Quay in Dublin, installed in 1997. These were complemented by his migration statues in Irish Park, Toronto, Canada in 2007. And then the female convict statues on the Hobart waterfront in 2017. In unveiling the waterfront statues, President Higgins wrote, "These sculptures, let us remind ourselves, also make common cause for the suffering of migrants in our times. They should remind us that the trauma of displacement and forced exile are not experiences confined to our past, but are the lived experience of millions around the world today, including many who now call Australia home." There are two main sites for From the Shadows statues. New high-quality bronze statues will be installed at two significant heritage sites in Tasmania, the Cascade Female Factory in South Hobart and the Orphan School site at Newtown. The Cascades Female Factory was inscribed on the World Heritage List in July 2010, along with 10 other Australian convict sites. The site aims to foster a greater understanding of and appreciation for the largely untold story of female convicts sent to Australia. It is the most significant site associated with female convicts in Australia and is managed by the Port Arthur Historic Site Management Authority. So this was our first statue, which was unveiled in February this year by then Governor Kate Warner. And it's on the grassed area outside the Cascade Female Factory. Has anyone seen her? Yeah, that's good. The heritage listed orphan school buildings at Newtown are located on Crown land and form part of St John's Park precinct. The buildings were designed by noted colonial architect John Lee Archer and were constructed by convict labour between 1831 and 1833. The buildings flank St John's Church, built in 1834. And for more information on From the Shadows project, you can go to our website, www.fromtheshadows.org.au. While convict women were serving their sentences, they were powerless to keep their children with them. For many of these children, their formative years were spent in a range of austere institutions. In the colony, families were fragmented as a result of death, desertion, and rigid rules and regulations. Mothers and children lost contact and many were not reunited. Many of the children disappeared from the records once they were released from the orphan schools. And the From the Shadows project is based on the idea that it's time for the stories of convict women and orphan school children to emerge from the shadows of the past. Thank you.